Maybe it's just the journalist in me, but the temptation to write headlines proclaiming it's the year of ... desktop Linux being a perpetual favorite, is strong. Ditto for headlines shouting that technology XYZ is dead. So, when our team of analysts here at Directions on Microsoft suggested a podcast entitled Is SQL Server Dead? You know I was champing at the bit to participate. Even if you're not a clickbait connoisseur, it's still a sound idea to ask what a particular product's role is and should be in an organization's systems architecture. And given several members of our team just finished work on our data analytics and AI roadmap, it seems like a good as time as any to ask whether SQL Server still has a future, especially given all the cloud-based, open source, and other kinds of database competitors that have emerged. Here, the SQL Server we are talking about is the product first released in the early 90s as the Microsoft Ashton Tate Sybase SQL Server for OS/2. Wow, I remember that. Admittedly, it has come a long way since then, but with Microsoft now supporting a variety of databases, including PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, Hadoop, etc., and with more and more data being unstructured, and newer technologies including data warehouses, data lakes, Cosmos DB, and Fabric all entering the picture. How does an organization create a forward-looking data management strategy? Welcome to the 5th episode in a series of Directions on Microsoft podcasts we call Brainstorm. I'm Mary Jo Foley, the editor-in-chief here at Directions. I'm your host for this series where our analysts discuss emerging topics on the Microsoft product, services, and strategies roadmaps. Brainstorm is your chance to see how the analysts at Directions on Microsoft do what we do. Twice weekly, the analysts hold scope meetings where we talk about the tech news of the week, reports we're working on, and the best ways to deliver the information that our customers need to know. Brainstorm is meant to give you a front row seat into one of these scope meetings. Today's roundtable features Andrew Snodgrass, who covers data management, business intelligence, ERP, and CRM here at Directions. Rob Sanfilippo, who covers Azure, SQL Server, Visual Studio, and other developer tools, and Barry Briggs, who handles Azure, Windows Server, enterprise architecture, and corporate governance. So let's jump right in. Maybe SQL Server isn't technically dead, but it certainly seems like Microsoft's focus has completely shifted to the cloud, with traditional on-premises Windows Server-based server products getting little or no love. So Rob, is SQL Server running in an organization's own data center dead? And is SQL Server the best tool for structured data, or if one is moving to the cloud? If not, what are other possible options?
Hi, Mary Jo.
Hello.
So, is SQL Server on-premises dead? Well, that question has a famous line from Monty Python and the Holy Grail echoing through my head. I think you all know the one. Let's think about SQL Server 2022, the latest major version of the product, which became generally available in November 2022. This version is the most Azure-enabled version yet, but that's no surprise. Each version of every Microsoft product for at least the last decade has become successively more Azure-enabled. However, the majority of the new features in SQL Server 2022 relate to connecting the product to Azure. Nevertheless, none of these Azure features are required. That is, there is no inherent functionality in the product that becomes disabled without a connection to Azure. The SQL Server is the only Microsoft Server product that continues to have a strong business case for an on-premises version with continued investment toward specific innovation that isn't just catch-up from what has been done in the analogous cloud offering. SQL Server is a mature product, has a large user base and talent pool. It's been used by enterprises for decades to create business applications. It runs thousands of mission-critical enterprise databases, many of which remain hosted in customer data centers. So the on-premises version isn't dead yet. But of course, SQL Server has had a life in the cloud for a long time now. There's a SQL Server-based offering was present when Azure debuted in 2010. And now there are several highly evolved SQL Server Azure services. Yet, there are database options beyond SQL Server and Azure, even for structured data.
Mm-hmm.
These are services based on open source database management systems that Microsoft hosts and supports. Specifically, there are services for PostgreSQL, MySQL, and MariaDB, all of which are SQL Server alternatives that can be less expensive while being simple to learn and deploy. The PaaS services Microsoft offers for these remove customer responsibility for infrastructure management, but they add high availability, automated backups, and advanced security. Now, PostgreSQL and MySQL are very popular, but note Microsoft's MariaDB service is being retired in about a year. And then there are also parts of Azure Cosmos DB that can handle structured data, but that service is more geared to semi-structured data, which will probably come up later in our podcast.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Barry, you're champing at the bit to say something yourself.
Yeah,
what would you like to say?
I just add that database, in response to the question, is SQL Server dead? I just add that databases used in mission critical applications have very, very long lifetimes. I was just looking moments ago and found that IMS, which was introduced in the 1960s by IBM, so over 60 years old, is still used by some companies. And so the implication is SQL Server, which also runs mission critical applications, probably has a very, very long life ahead of it.
Okay. Andy, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just keep getting my dad's voice in my head, and he keeps saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's a lot with the SQL Server side of things where it's a very mature product. It does incredibly well at what it does. It doesn't do everything, and I'll talk about that in a little while, but it does do what it does incredibly well. So I think people may switch to like a Postgres, which has come along leaps and bounds in the recent years, mostly from a cost side. Licensing Postgres is a lot less expensive than licensing SQL Server, but if it isn't broken and it does everything you want it to do and it does it well, then you don't mess with it. And I think we're fine with SQL Server for a while.
Okay. All right, Andrew, I'm going to call on you next. One of the changes that seem to be affecting organizations' data management strategies is the need to work increasingly with semi-structured and unstructured data, as you just mentioned. I know this requires some generalizations, but how does Microsoft address the semi-structured data on both on-premises and in Azure?
The semi-structured side of things, so we're talking about like document type databases and that type. So with this, where we enter into the realm of MongoDB and the rest of those, for an on-prem side, Microsoft really doesn't have a solution for that. They tried to put JSON-related activities and capabilities into SQL Server, and they're still there, but it's not necessarily a solution for hosting real document databases. It's mostly about being able to read JSON files and document files and be able to join those with other structured stuff, and then taking structured stuff and writing that out into a document format. It's not about managing a document database. So in that realm, it's all in the cloud. And for the NoSQL type of things, the semi-structured, it's almost entirely in Cosmos DB. They've got the MongoDB capability that's in there. They can do proper MQL queries. They've got everything you would want in a hosted solution for this within Cosmos DB. And so from the semi-structured side, I would stay entirely cloud and look Cosmos. What do you guys think? Anything else in that area?
Yeah, no, I agree. And, Cosmos has a long history. It started as Document DB back in the day, and then evolved into this flagship offering for semi-structured and unstructured data. So, the big thing for me when I think about Cosmos is, supports all these different APIs, as you mentioned. In fact, it's become the case that one of my friends at a large consulting firm said that for them, Cosmos is quote unquote first among equals, that when they're selecting a database for an application for a customer, Cosmos should be the first one that they evaluate.
Rob?
Yeah, there's been so many database offerings in the last decade, new ones, and Azure is making that proliferate a lot. A thought that I've had over the recent years, even before all the generative AI craze, is that when you're building a solution and you need a database, wouldn't it be great if AI could examine your solution and see how your application is behaving and recommend which database technology to use? Because a lot of these, even they're semi-structured, structured, unstructured, they overlap and they could serve similar purposes for the same application. So I'm still waiting for this, but wouldn't it be great if AI could help you figure out which one to choose? But that's just my thought on all these choices.
It would make it easier, that's for sure. If it ever actually gets to the point where it can be not hallucinating, I guess.
Right.
Okay. I also wanted to
database hallucinations.
It's a movie.
Did you imagine how bad could that be?
I wanted to talk up a little bit more about unstructured data. And I don't know which of you would like to start with this one, but I'm curious how Microsoft proposes that organizations address their unstructured data needs, again, both on premises and in Azure. Andy, would you like to start?
Yeah. Okay. I think when it comes to the unstructured side, we could probably leave the on-prem out of this discussion. Okay. At one point, Microsoft tried to expand SQL Server with unstructured data. Long time ago, take you in the Wayback Machine, there was a thing called the Analytics Platform System, APS. And this was a weird hybrid-y thing where they had married two database engines, the SQL Server database engine and Hadoop database environment onto a single device, right? And they were using this thing to do some weird queries. It was almost unnatural at times. And they were storing unstructured data in this big device with all the mirroring capability that they have with Hadoop and the scale out performance and query capabilities, and tied that in with SQL Server. And for some people, it worked really well, but it was incredibly expensive. Okay, and they're retiring this thing anyway. Mm-hmm. The other one was they took that experience they had and they tried to throw it into the normal SQL Server product into a thing called big data clusters. And this came out a few versions ago, and it lasted one version and then they deprecated and it's being retired as well. And so they effectively said, we aren't going to do this. We don't want SQL Server to try to manage and store unstructured data. Now, in SQL Server, there's still a thing called Polybase. And there's still data virtualization. And so if you have unstructured data stores of your own, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem, SQL Server can comfortably query that unstructured data and works really well with Hadoop deployments, right? And so I think they realized they were trying to do too much and then they scaled it back. Mm-hmm. Now, so you can still do those things on-prem, but most of the unstructured stuff for Microsoft is going to be in the cloud, and there's HDInsight, Hadoop, which is like an on-prem deployment. You can do a bunch of stuff in some data lakes and lakehouses in Azure Databricks. There's Azure Data Lake Storage that's out there, and now we have this new thing called OneLake. And so all of this capability is really cloud-based. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I would say that's interesting on it is that Microsoft kind of has a standard or a preference of Apache technology, right? And so all the things that we talk about here, with the exception of the MongoDB, right, all the rest of this stuff is really Apache focused. And so I want people to keep that in mind in case they have Apache on-prem or that skill set. That's Microsoft's preferred flavor as well.
Okay. Barry?
Yeah, when I think about unstructured data, data generally, I tend to think about use cases and what are the requirements that the platform has to have to support them. So, for example, the kind of canonical example is, how do I do sentiment analysis over tweets? Or how do I look at IoT telemetry, trying to determine if, say, a given device somewhere in my oil refinery or what have you is going to fail? And here, here's a case where you don't need full transactional semantics. You don't need two-phase commit. You don't need, you almost never do updates. You get the data, it's append only. So here, here's a case where a data lake or Cosmos or something like that would be a really good choice. And, Andy mentioned that, this is, you don't see this too much on premises anymore. Why? Well, because you have the scale in the cloud that allows you to collect as much data as you possibly need. You don't have to worry as much about capacity planning and so forth. So, when I think about choosing, a platform, I always start with what's the use case and what technology best suits it.
Mm-hmm.
Barry, I just had this vision in my head of you sitting back in your chair, chin on your hand, thinking about data. It really tickled me when I sit around thinking about data. Yeah.
I actually had the same vision. So.
Did you?
Barry brings those out to us.
Thinker.
All right. On that note, let me take a quick break so I can talk about a series of podcasts that we recorded last year, specifically dedicated to EAs, or enterprise agreements. Directions created a 6-part podcast series featuring various members of our advisory services team, led by Dean Bedwell, about Microsoft EA negotiation. Before he joined Directions, Dean spent 11 years at Microsoft managing the Canadian business desk, where he was responsible for negotiating agreements with Microsoft's largest enterprise and public sector customers. In our series, we discuss everything from project management to discovery, analysis, strategies for getting discounts and concessions, and negotiation levers. Whether you are new to the EA negotiation process or a veteran who wants to hear more about the tips and tricks that we discovered over the years, you should check out our Microsoft EA negotiation podcasts. Go to directionsonmicrosoft.com/podcast and listen to the full series for free. We've also got a free deep dive explainer on the Microsoft EA negotiation process. You can check it out on our website at directionsonmicrosoft.com. Go to the resources tab and you can read that one and any and all of our other deep dive reports right there. Okay, back to our panel. Andrew, we've spent a bit of time discussing database engines for various types of data, but lately I've been hearing a lot about Fabric, and I know you have too. So what is Fabric and how does it figure in the Microsoft database landscape?
I've wanted to come up with some kind of clever response on what is Fabric that actually use bolts and all the rest of it, and I need to sit down and think about it like Barry does. That's what I need to do. So Fabric, in a nutshell, Fabric is a new offering that's mostly based on existing services. Okay, like it has some stuff from Synapse Analytics, it has some stuff from Azure Machine Learning, it has Power BI, it has a bunch of different things in it. What Fabric really does, and why it's interesting, is it provides a simplified way for deploying these services and tying them together. And as part of that, there's a new thing in it called OneLake. And OneLake is a way of creating shared data sets that everyone is able to tap into and do analytics against and run reports against without having to have their own copy. Okay, and it also includes so within the data, there are two things. There's the lakehouses and there are data warehouses. Now, lakehouses, this is kind of a relatively new thing. I wouldn't describe it as unstructured data or structured data. It's kind of like a quasi, not really semi-structured data mart, okay, but it's an area where we're able to take lots of different types of data, put them in one location, and the lakehouse puts structure around it for us, okay? It gives it some kind of column definition. It gives it some indexing capability so we can run queries against all different types of data that reside within this lakehouse. Now, in OneLake, they do this by having or by using open source technologies. Okay, and one of them is they do an Apache Delta Lake structure over the top of things. It gives it this, schematic capability where you've got rows and columns and definitions for tables and that type of thing. But they also support a thing called Iceberg, and this is relatively new. Okay, Iceberg is the one that Snowflake can use. And that's interesting because if you want to put your Snowflake data within one lake, you've got that capability now, which you couldn't do before. Okay. And so the nice thing on it in one lake is they share all this data amount amongst all the people that are there. Now, Fabric also has, or OneLake also has, a data warehouse option within it, and that's very structured. It's got, it has referential integrity, but that's because they force it to have it. This is all still based on open source technology. It uses Parquet files on the back end. It uses a Delta layer over the top to give it the structure. And they've also put in a T-SQL compatible layer on it so that you can run T-SQL commands against the whole thing. Now, the idea for the data warehousing in OneLake is that it's supposed to be a replacement for traditional SQL Server data warehouses. But, okay, now here's the however part, right? The Lakehouse feature, it lacks a lot of the high-end security controls that a lot of people want, especially if you're dealing with protected data or personal information, and it's trying to compete with Databricks, but it doesn't have that high-end data or security control yet, and so it's a ways out. I would say a couple of years out from being up to that level. And the data warehouse feature, this is not completely compatible with SQL Server, and it doesn't have a bunch of T-SQL capabilities. And so as far as being a data warehouse replacement for SQL Server, this thing isn't ready for prime time at all. Okay, I think they're several years away from being up to that level. They're getting there, and they're trying to, but they're starting with an open source technology that's not T-SQL. It's not SQL Server, and so it's struggling to try to be as good as SQL Server is. Okay. Now these are all good solutions, but the Fabric stuff, the data stuff in Fabric, it's not great yet. I've got hope for it, but it's not there yet.
Okay. All right. Let's do a question that's open to everyone here. One of the key reasons to have a database in the first place is to analyze and report on the data. Here too, Microsoft has a wide swath of offerings, including SQL Server reporting services, Power BI, and even Excel. Given that SQL Server is not dead, but also isn't Microsoft's #1 priority, is SQL Server reporting services on the outs? And more generally, how should organizations be thinking about reporting? Who would like to start?
Barry was right. We need an hour on each one of these things to really get into the detail.
Each of these questions is a novel, worthy of a novel, right?
Okay, so I cover the
hopefully nonfiction, but
yeah.
You know what? With some of the GA stuff, I think we could stay into this fiction side and be just fine. Okay, so first off, SQL Server reporting services, and I'm just going to say SSRS from now on. Okay, SSRS isn't dead. It's just being morphed. Okay, and it's being morphed into Power BI because Power BI is king and has been for several years when it comes to the reporting visualization side. Okay, but one of the things they did with SSRS is they made it available inside of Power BI early on. And the reason for that is Power BI, as the tool itself and Power BI Desktop, is very good at visuals. It can create all kinds of graphs and charts and do some whiz-bang stuff and interactive. It's really impressive, right? But one of the things it had always struggled at was it couldn't create a traditional tabular report. The financial ones, right? The rows and columns type things, and have it fit just perfectly in it. It always struggled being able to do that. And that's what people typically used SSRS for. Okay. And so what they did is instead of saying, well, let's reinvent the report definition language, this RDL language that sits within inside SSRS, they said, why don't we just host SSRS reports instead and let people stay with what they have, and that way they don't have to rewrite them. Okay, and so one of the things you can do is you can bring your RDLs, your SSRS reports from on-prem and put them in Power BI, and they run, once you do all the connections, everything really well. But they also said people have to keep doing this on-prem, and if they're not going to come to the cloud, we'll come to them. And so they created this special edition of SSRS on-prem that's called Power BI Report Server. All right, and it sounds like a different thing, but it's really just a special edition of SSRS that can do everything SSRS can do all the RDLs and paginated stuff, but it can also host Power BI visuals. Okay, and so you can actually bring some stuff from the cloud down to on-prem. Okay, so SSRS is still a viable product on-prem. It's mature and it receives few updates, but that's fine. It does everything it's supposed to do. But the tech that's underneath SQL Server Reporting Services is still alive and well inside of Power BI and is still actually being developed and supported. So I don't think SSRS as a product is in any danger. They might, eventually want to push everyone over to the Power BI report server, but there hasn't been any indication on that at all. And with this latest SQL Server 2022 that came out, perpetual use rights say you've got a 10-year window of support. So we're talking 2032 before anybody really needs to start thinking about that. Okay. You guys agree?
Barry?
Yeah, I was going to say that you asked about Excel, and I would say that in my previous role at Microsoft, I talked to literally hundreds of CIOs and CTOs, and I think the great secret is that every organization, every IT organization, whether they want to admit it or not, runs on Excel. And that's a scary thought, right? Because I mean, we all do it, right? It's just so easy and so convenient. The danger, of course, is there have been studies that show that something like 90% of Excel files, Excel worksheets have errors in them, formula errors or what have you. And so that's kind of a frightening thing. So, to the extent that, maybe we start pushing people more and more toward Power BI, that's a good thing. We could establish a little bit more governance over it. But I'm not completely convinced that, we will ever get people off of Excel.
Mm-hmm. Rob?
Yeah, well, Barry, that's interesting that you plug Excel like that since you were the lead dev on 123 back in the day. But, same space. I'm a big fan of Excel, and spreadsheets are great. But I wanted to add that low-code development has become prominent, and that some reporting solutions that previously required a dedicated development team are now being handled by power users with offerings like Power Automate, Power Pages, and even Copilot Studio. But I don't think low code is fully displacing pro code for reporting. It's just a wider spectrum of participants now, and there's still a place for SSRS.
Good point. Okay, we haven't mentioned this yet, but it's time. We're going to talk about AI. So, Barry, I'm going to pick on you for this one. How should companies be thinking about which database platform they should use as part of their AI plans and strategies? Is Microsoft offering anything or some kind of set of offerings that are better or worse suited for AI apps and services?
Well, I'm excited to hear this, Barry. Go for it. This is good.
Yeah, get the PhD dissertation out. So the way I'd answer that is that there's a battle of the titans underway right now, and it's between Fabric, Databricks, and Snowflake. And each one of them has a dedicated following, lots of people who are well trained in each target AI workloads. I'd say if you look at them, Fabric has the greatest compatibility with the Microsoft ecosystem of services. Databricks offers a huge choice of open source LLMs, a great data governance tool, Unity. Snowflake sports an advanced scale-out architecture, which separates compute from data in really interesting ways. And actually also interesting, from what I can tell, AWS and Google are sort of content to host Databricks and Snowflake and collect the consumption fees, which are substantial. And the one thing to say about the three titans here is it's very hard to do an apples-to-apples cost comparison. Now, there's a couple of challenges in deploying any one of these workloads. And the biggest one, of course, is data quality. There's always somebody that leaves a required field blank or types in an illegal zip code or postal code. And it's kind of a common axiom in the data science space that 90% of the work is in fixing the data and 10% is doing the AI. Mm-hmm. The other big challenge is governance, making sure that users only see the data, the responses to the prompts that they're authorized to. And these are both kind of brainstorm topics in and of themselves. So, but I want to kind of jump ahead a few years and pose an interesting thought experiment, which is, where is all this going? So I was chatting with a friend of mine from Microsoft the other day, and he said something that really piqued my interest. And here it is. If an LLM, like Copilot or whatever, or ChatGPT, can sniff out and harvest all the data from all over the enterprise, well, who needs a data warehouse then? Who needs a data lake, a lake house or whatever? Think about it. Warehouses are used for what? They're used for analysis and reporting. That's what an LLM is for. So maybe not this year or next year, but maybe in 5 years, 6 years, maybe the LLM, instead of the data storage technology, will be the hub for analysis and reporting.
Now that's an interesting idea, isn't it? So
It
you use
is.
an LLM as a data aggregator, cleanser, summarization tool.
Right. And
that.
if you think about it, the LLMs are actually quite good. There's some things that they're quite bad at, as we've already discussed, but they're quite good at sort of inferring that, ST equals street and AVE means avenue, and you really meant this zip code when you typed in that zip code and that sort of thing.
And there's a lot of that data cleanup that happens with some automated processes right now, but I could see that as being a full-scale aggregator. Interesting diversion, Barry. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think it's a good time to take another break before we head into the customer questions segment to talk about our world famous Microsoft licensing bootcamps. If you haven't had the opportunity to participate in one of these multi-day learning events, you are missing out. I went to the Atlanta Bootcamp last year, and I really felt like both the quantity and quality of information was very impressive. The opportunity to talk with the directions analysts and other customers there really makes the event. It is the place to update and ensure your knowledge is current. We have got another in-person bootcamp coming up very soon, September 10th to 12th in Bellevue, right near Microsoft's home headquarters. If you're based in the Pacific Northwest or can find your way there on short notice, consider attending. It won't be raining nonstop yet, hopefully. Plus, you can easily head over to the new Microsoft campus to meet with your favorite Microsoft teams and reps. Just be careful about riding the corporate shuttle. Ask me how I know. And if you can't make it to Bellevue, we have other virtual and in-person events on the schedule for the rest of this year and next. In addition to the boot camps, we also offer advisory services like EA negotiation support and Microsoft strategy assessments, where we help you one-on-one with your specific Microsoft product questions and licensing issues. Go to directionsonmicrosoft.com or email info@directionsonmicrosoft.com to learn more about all of the services that we offer. We're going back to our panel now of Directions data experts, and I see Andrew wants to say something. Please.
Yeah, so during the break, I started thinking about this. In Barry's comment there about should we just use an LLM to gather the data?
Yeah.
This isn't exactly the same, but it's something worth noting what Microsoft is trying to pursue in Fabric. There's a new thing called AI skills. All right, and it's a feature. It's early preview, and there's just a little bit of information out there about it. But what they're trying to do. But the idea here is if you're using Fabric and using OneLake and you have your data sources out there and it can touch all these things, and whatever you build and query around it, you can start using the Copilot, the AI capabilities that are in Fabric, and create a skill. And by what they mean by that is not an AI related skill, but rather a business function activity, like maybe a finance department or an HR or manufacturing or whatever it is. And you can not necessarily ground Copilot against the data because it already does that, but you can start to tweak it and give it specific wording and nuances and questions and capabilities, almost like creating a Copilot. Rob, this is a lot like Copilot Studio, but specifically for data. where you're able to say, I'm going to create this skill, and it'll create then this AI component that sits out there that your user doesn't know about, but has been tailored to look at data in their specific way. And you can tell it, well, ignore these type of columns, or ignore this specific area, or use this whenever anyone's talking about a person's name. Try to help the thing figure out what all of it is and make your data more accessible through natural language, which I find an interesting approach.
Very interesting. And you said early preview, right, on that one?
Yeah, it is early preview. Yeah. I was just reading some stuff on it the other day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Let's go to our customer question. We had a customer write in and ask, we have SQL Server, and we understand we can have a second SQL Server available for disaster recovery. Is this correct? I think Rob might want to start with that one.
Sure. Well, there's another novel.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. What do we have? That is a correct idea that they have. That is a true thing. There are stipulations that must be understood about this. So SQL Server software assurance includes rights to deploy multiple secondary SQL Server operating system environments for high availability and disaster recovery purposes. But customers need to verify whether their method for implementing high availability and disaster recovery qualifies for these rights, because certain typical scenarios do not qualify. Each SQL Server OS environment license with software assurance provides rights that allow deployment of up to 3 failover SQL Server OS environments. So you get high availability on one server, disaster recovery on another server, and a disaster recovery instance on Azure. However, your eligibility requirements will include things like failover instances can't be used for reporting or analysis, and disaster recovery failover cannot be automatic. So we've seen customer deployments that appear to be eligible for the free secondary instances, but when we scrutinize them, we look at the configuration and how they've deployed, they do not meet these requirements. So just a word to everyone out there in this situation, be diligent about reviewing your deployments to ensure you have licensed them appropriately to get these rights, or read my report on this that discusses the gory details of what your rights are.
Yep. Don't want to run afoul of the licensing police, right?
No.
No.
And go to those boot camps too. That helps too.
Right. Okay, let's go to our closing hot buttons segment. So when we talk about the hot buttons, we go around and we ask each analyst, what are you looking at in the world of Microsoft right now? What's catching your eye, or what are you digging deeper into? Who would like to start? Barry?
Sure. So actually, this stuff is my hot button. Everything we've been talking about. As a former CTO, the importance of data and data management is sort of second nature. In fact, at Microsoft, for many years, I had a whole team of data architects reporting to me, and we worried about things like data models and data integration and ETLs and warehousing and reporting and all that stuff. So this is a topic with which I'm quite familiar and quite passionate. But stepping back a little bit, when I think about this, it seems to me that we're in a really significant time of change right now, as we're able to harness all of our corporate data, all of our enterprise data. I'm surprised we've gotten through this whole podcast without saying data is the new oil, because that's kind of the phrase of the day, but it's true, right? And we've seen huge steps in the democratization of data. And I remember back in the old days, a business user would have to write a requirements document in order to get a new kind of report. And that, would go through the whole, prioritization process, blah, 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 blah. And today, a skilled business user can use Power BI or Tableau or Power Apps or Excel to get a new visualization. Tomorrow, I think, you'll see them using LLMs LLMs that are safely and securely grounded in corporate data to get those reports. But Here's what I don't think we've seen yet is, and again, this is the looking 4 or 5 or 6 years out perspective, and what I call actions, or once you see a report, you take some action, you do something. So the example I always use is, imagine you're the CEO of Microsoft and you're looking at a report of Xbox sales, and then you say, lower the price of Xbox in Japan by 5%. Tell me tomorrow if that resulted in increased revenue. That's moving from reporting to actually controlling your business. So giving executives full control of a business. That's what I think kind of the next major revolution in data is. I think we're still quite a long ways from that, but hopefully maybe 5 years, 6 years, let's see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Andy.
So, yeah, let me do a follow-on. Barry, I just read this post on agentic AI. Do you think that falls anywhere in that realm of the executive being able to make those kind of adjustments without having to go through IT?
It was a really brilliant post, wasn't it?
It was, yes. If you haven't read it yet, there's
guess who wrote
a thing called CIO Talk, and it's all about AI and LLMs. And this guy I know wrote about a discussion of agentic AI, and I thought, wow, this is really kind of interesting stuff here, because I'm like Barry, I'm very much a data guy. So Barry, yeah, answer. What do you think?
So I think this agentic AI thing, frankly, it's a bit overhyped. When I think about agentic AI, I think about LLMs essentially participating in a workflow or participating in a business process. And, there's certainly a place for that, right? But, for example, you might have, Andy, this is in your space, you might have, a Dynamics application using an LLM to capture what a customer is calling and complaining about and directing it to the right CSR and so forth, customer service rep and so forth, or analyzing parts coming out of a manufacturing line for defective parts or for good parts and so forth. All those things are useful applications of LLMs and AI. But I don't think they're the sorts of things that you want to subsume the executive's role in the organization. You don't want them actually being the exec. You need to give, the human has to play a role here.
I don't know. You and I have seen some executives over the years. This might be an improvement.
As I was saying that, I was thinking to myself, I know what Andy's going to say.
Yes.
All right. Data geeks geeking out about data. Let's go.
So in my realm on it, it follows along this line. I'm following all the Fabric stuff. Mm-hmm. And seeing how the transition is from the old services to the new, because there's going to be retirements that happen and people are going to have to make adjustments and do migrations and changeover and all the rest of it. And that's all normal, right? With the type of thing we see with new services, new versions, that always happens. So there's nothing new there. Just once again, convincing everyone that simply because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't have to upgrade. You do, just like you did on-prem. It's just you have to do it at someone else's schedule now. So I'm looking at all that stuff. But this whole Fabric thing is really, it's got me excited, I have to say, more than I've been in a long time around data-related services. I mean, when Power BI first came out, incredible tool that, when we were in production, would have loved to have had a reporting tool like that. And now Fabric is here. And if they get this thing right, and actually get it done, which is going to take them a couple of years to get it done, I think it has some incredible value with it. And with the introduction of AI on top of that, if you can put the right data governance around, if you can train your AI query capability to hopefully move stuff away from the IT department of having to answer questions, because the AI is smart enough to give the right answer to the user, that in my realm, that has two real benefits. One is allows the IT professionals to do more high value things, more complex and more data design and make sure the stuff's right. But it also takes that risk away from the end user using Excel to try to come up with the answer on their own. And, we talk about bad problems in spreadsheets and incorrect formulas and the rest, but queries are just as bad. And if you allow users to query against a data mart or a data warehouse, they invariably query the wrong things or run the wrong summarizations or get the wrong filters or whatever it is. And so if you had an AI there that was trained properly to answer company questions in the way the company wants it answered, I think you can bridge that gap and help your end users perform better and have lower risk of bad answers. So I'm following. I think this is a really exciting time for it. Yeah.
Andy, do you think that Microsoft has done just an absolutely terrible job of communicating what Fabric is? When I search on the web or look at things, the number one question I see relating to Fabric is, what is Fabric?
Yeah. Oh, all right. First off, they should have asked people, what do you think we ought to name this? Because the idea of calling it Fabric was really dumb to begin with. Anyone in IT would say Fabric. Oh, you must be talking about like Service Fabric. We're talking the underlying controls of an environment, right? That's what Fabric actually is. And what this is simply a simplified deployment tool. And that, if they had advertised that alone to say, we're going to let all your analysts work in their favorite tool using a similar UI. We're going to have everybody sharing security so that you can have better risk and compliance control over all your data because it's a shared security model. And we're automatically going to deploy all these Azure storage accounts for you associated with the workspace that you're working in, but we'll still tie them all together so that you don't have to see all these different accounts out there, that it'll appear as one giant lake. If they had just said that, people would have gone, well, crap, you just took away 90% of the hassle of deploying all those services you have. Thank you. And people would have jumped in on that.
You keep saying tie together, and that makes me think of weaving together, which makes me think of a fabric. So I think that's where the tying, the string, the tight, I don't know.
I think we can all agree it has not been a banner. It has not been a banner year for Microsoft branding. Period. Right.
No.
We're not going to get into Copilot.
When was the last banner year of that?
When they called everything .net. Remember that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Good times.
Too soon, Mary Jo. Too soon.
Too soon. I know. All right, Rob. What about you? These guys are like totally all in on the data, really thinking about it in their free time. What about you? What are you working on?
Yeah, sitting by the fire, thinking about data. Can I change the topic completely in this part? Is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay, cool. I want to highlight some things on GitHub Copilot. Okay, it's the first Copilot Microsoft offered. It's been available for almost 3 years now. So it provides assistance to developers writing code and related activities, and it includes a natural language-based chat UI. So there are three purchase tiers for GitHub Copilot. There's individual, business, and enterprise. But here's where it gets interesting. The business tier can be purchased without also buying a base GitHub license. So the only cost right now for that tier is $19 per user per month. But if you move up to enterprise, the top tier, and that tier adds powerful features like the ability to train on your own code base. But if you go there, you have to buy a base GitHub Enterprise user subscription license for each user on top of the Copilot Enterprise license. So even though it appears that the price is $39 per user per month for GitHub Copilot Enterprise, it's really that plus another $21 per user per month. So that makes it $60 per month. Compare $60 per user to $19 per user. That's more than triple to go from business to enterprise in GitHub Copilot. And also enterprise, by the way, can only train on your code if it's stored in GitHub, whereas other features of GitHub Copilot work with code stored elsewhere. It could be in GitLab or Bitbucket, for example. So anyway, it's a rushed explanation, but I hope that the idea of the tripling the price has raised some eyebrows. I have a report coming with the details of this. And anyway, my advice is to explore the small print when choosing among the options for purchasing GitHub Copilot.
Okay. All right, that's a good tip. Anyone else want to add anything before we close this out?
Data.
Data. It's all about data.
Well, it's kind of like the Beetlejuice reference, right?
It is.
If you say it 3 times, you're going to wind up with a pile of data on your desk.
Good one. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all. That was really fun. I want to remind our listeners they can find lots more coverage of all things Microsoft related on directionsonmicrosoft.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, comments, or any topics that you would like to hear the Directions analysts cover in one of these podcasts, please do not hesitate to contact me via Twitter, or X as it's now known, at Mary Jo Foley. And speaking of Twitter, we at Directions have converged our channels into a single new platform. So give us a follow at Directions MSFT to keep up with all of the latest Microsoft Enterprise product and licensing information. Thanks again.